So anyway, we're going to bring out our next guest. She's a young adult fiction author. Her name is Kim Johnson, and her book is called The Color of a Lie. And it's young adult fiction, and I'll let her tell us about it. I haven't read it yet, but it sounds like a very intriguing plot. And I read about it, and that's what caused me to extend the invitation because it sounded like a really, really good story. So, Kim, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
Glad to have you.
So, do you have a copy of your book of it handy?
I do, right here.
Okay, The Color of a Lie. Okay, I like the cover,
Thank
and
you.
and it's got young people on it, so hopefully they'll be drawn. Young readers will be drawn to it.
Yeah, I hope so. A lot of my work, I do have crossover with young adults and adult, but young people do tend to be drawn to my stuff because I make it fast paced. So,
Okay, and they came out in June, so it's been out for a couple of months.
yeah.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about your writing background, how you got, which book is this in your list
Yeah.
of books published, and how did you get started with your career? And then we'll learn more about the story.
Yeah, this is my third book published. I published my first book in 2020. I've been really fortunate to have an incredible editor at Random House, and all my books have came out of Random House. And I started writing later in life. I never really thought of myself as a writer. When I was growing up, even having a college degree, a graduate degree, I had that imposter syndrome with writing. I just
Mm.
felt like I wasn't a creator, I wasn't creative. I was other things. I was a leader, I was a problem solver, but don't make me put it down on paper. and but I was always a storyteller. And I had people around me who were always telling stories and just telling them either in my head or, oral storytelling, watching shows, reading books, breaking things down. And I was 32 at the time, and I woke up from a dream, and I've always had very vivid dreams. And I just got up and said, I'm going to go to the bookstore and start writing. And I just fell in love with writing. And several years later, 5 or 6 years later, I finally found my agent. And then a year after that, Random House bought my first novel, This Is My America, and I've been writing ever since.
Wow. What do you think it was that solidified your love for writing? What was it about writing?
I think especially as you get older and a lot of your habits and interests, you start to get very focused on the real world and real life problems and the things that you have to do, and you lose pieces of yourself. You lose that oftentimes, that creative sense, if you're not in a field that's creative. And I felt like I needed something that was for me. I felt like I had young kid at the time, and I was busy with work, and it became sort of this like sacred space for
Yes.
me to be able to create and birth my own story. And initially when I started writing, I didn't actually have publishing on my sites. It was just about, wow, I've got this space where I can tell a story, and I can use my imagination in a way. And then that kind of like took off when I realized, like, wow, I'm actually good at this. I actually can do this. So
Now, you also mentioned something very powerful. You said that you felt that you had imposter syndrome. How did were you able to work past that, or have you even worked past it?
I worked past most of it, but it's still there. I think every time I start working on a new book, I think that's actually a very common thing for writers. You're like, oh my goodness, how do I do this again? Like, I gotta
Yes.
start from scratch. But it definitely was something that I think holds us back, especially a Black community. There's so many ways that we always have to prove ourselves, and because we
Yes.
often have to prove ourselves, we think that we have to be the best at it, where I think other communities, they actually don't have to fight through that. They don't have to be the best at it. And so I think a lot of it stems from feeling like if I wasn't excellent at it, then maybe it shouldn't be something that I should try. And you know, I think it's like once I learned that I was getting better and better, and I was learning how to tell a story, and I was getting a lot of feedback, that confidence really started to build, and has erased a lot of it. So.
Nice.
Yeah, other people, I'll say mostly the majority population, they get the benefit of the doubt most of the time, like 99% of the time. And they don't have to prove that they're worthy is just the word that comes to my mind right now. They don't have to prove that, and it's assumed that they are until they show that they aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
We have to prove ourselves first, and we don't get that benefit of the doubt.
But the
Yeah.
sad part is that as we're talking about this, some would assume that we're talking about we have to prove ourselves to other people, to white people or non-black
Other
people. But
cultures.
often we have to prove ourselves to our own people.
Mhm.
Because I mean, if you think back to that old episode of Sanford and Son, when Lamont took Fred to the doctor, and Fred said that he only wanted a white doctor.
Mhm.
And then he wound up getting a black doctor. And he automatically started thinking about, oh, did you just take a correspondence course? Or are you experienced? Are you really good at this? And ask them all these questions instead of saying, oh, I have a black doctor, I'm excited. He just automatically thought that he couldn't do it. And I think often we ourselves, our cultures start to think that of ourselves, where we think that our own people can't do it, or that we're not as good. And we wind up, when we become authors, or when we become professionals or so forth, instead of them saying, oh, my cousin, my sister, or my friend is great at something, we automatically think that they're not as great, and we have to, and then they wind up having to prove themselves to show that they are great at what they do.
Yeah, you know, I really do see that a lot. I think that we're just, as a society, dominant culture has really indoctrinated us, because we can't run away from it. It's all around us. I mean, you could even look at this, you know, election that's going on, where,
Yes.
you know, Kamala Harris has a huge record of accomplishments, of just being at the top in what she's doing. But the sort of immediate response from some community members, not internally within our own community, but externally, is being told that, oh, she's not bright, she's a DEI hire, she's this and she's that. And I think we pick that up because we see that so much, and have to, you know, like fight against a lot of those places, which is unfortunate.
I agree.
Yeah. Sometimes when people question our credentials, I guess, you know, I never used the term imposter syndrome because it wasn't, I haven't worked for anybody in a long time. So there's no imposters in my office because I decide who comes in. But so me hearing some of the terms that are used in, you know, corporate settings, or, you know, large, even government entities, there's somewhat new, but not really. You know, when people say it, then I get to go back in my head to years ago when I worked for somebody, you know, but I haven't experienced it directly in many years because I haven't worked for anybody else in a long time. So that's one benefit of that. Even though, you know, there are challenges, I tell people there are challenges to being self-employed, but I don't have to deal with racism at work. That's one thing I haven't had to deal with in decades because I haven't had a boss. And I've employed people of all persuasions, but they worked for me, so they had to do whatever I told them, or they were out the door. So, but yeah, you don't have the nurturing network around you. And a lot of times, it's the higher you go up, the more isolated you are.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so you don't get the same encouragement or again, benefit of the doubt that other people get. So the color of a lie, does that include anything about the imposter syndrome, or does that have other underlying plot lines?
Yeah, you know, I think that it actually is a great way to think about it, because in this story, Calvin it sort of toggles between the Black community and the white community. And so that sense of who you are and what you're capable of, you know, is a theme in a lot of my work. Maybe not necessarily imposter syndrome, but just like figuring out who you are and who you want to be.
Mhm.
So with this story, it's my first historical thriller. My other works I call are social justice thrillers. They deal across places of race and identity and justice and systems, and telling the stories that I do. And so for this particular story, my main character is different in a lot of ways when we see stories about passing. Is that many stories about passing that have been inspirations for my work, like Nella Larson's Passing, or The Vanishing Half, are folks who have made that decision that they actually want to pass. In my story, it's his father who makes a decision because he was a World War II vet, came back from the war, fighting fascism, and realizing that, oh, wow, I thought I would come back and have these rights given to me, and they're not, which was experience of many Black soldiers from World War II. And so he's like, I'm going to get my piece of the American pie. And so his father moves their community to Levittown, which is an actual real community through three very well-known Levittowns: Levittown, Pennsylvania, Long Island, and New York, that were all white exclusive communities in the 1940s and 50s. And they decide to move as white. And so for Calvin in this story, he has to strip away actually who he is and create a new identity because he needs to fit in. And his father is very fearful that if he does the things that he loves, like playing jazz music and other things, he'll get found out.
So is the son, is he able to pass too?
His son, actually, in the story, the way that I've written it is that his son is able to pass, his wife is able to pass, so the family is able to pass, but he does have an older brother that it's a little bit more difficult to pass. And he's a bit estranged already because of, don't want to see the spoilers, because of something that happened previously, and some challenges that his father has with his older son, that he lives on the other side. He has actually moved to this town, but it's about 11 miles away. So there's a Black side of town, it's 11 miles away, and the white side of town from there. And so he balances going across sides of communities.
It's interesting, the location where your story takes place, because we often hear of this happening in cities like New Orleans. I'm from New Orleans. And even today, there is a bit of a color line in the city. There are certain areas where you're going to see more lighter skinned people because in the 20s, 30s, 40s, that's where the lighter skinned people lived. And so you'll see a higher concentration of them there. Then we talk about the brown paper bag test. We saw a lot of that happening in New Orleans. So it's interesting that your story doesn't take place in New Orleans, which shows people that this just wasn't a New Orleans problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really, a lot of times when we talk about race and justice and those kinds of stories, they're often told in the South.
Mm-hmm.
And we almost forgive the Midwest and the North as if these issues didn't occur in there. And so when
Yes.
I placed it in Pennsylvania, I really wanted it to be thinking about the greater issue of white flight, when Black folks actually were moving from the South to the North and Midwest for opportunity, only for white folks to sort of like freak out over it and then try to create their own enclaves, and having benefits of better real estate rates, actual access to different kind of real estate. And so again, being more secluded into their own communities.
It made me, what you talked about made me think of two things. And I want to make sure I bring them both up. Uh, So hold on one second. Normally passing, and I was just sitting thinking about it, it's always a female who's the object of a story about passing. In movies, I won't say always, but primarily it's a female who's passing. You don't really hear about the males passing unless it's a family passing. There's an old movie, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a doctor. It's a black and white film, and it's one of those during like the Imitation of Life time, but it wasn't that one. And it was a doctor and his wife, and the whole family was passing, and they ended up getting found out. So shoot, I think well, I can't think of the name. Jose Ferrer was an actor. Anyway, I need to look it up because I saw it once and it's been
Yeah,
years
when you
ago.
see it, please send it to me.
Yeah,
Because
let us
I
know.
haven't seen it. Yeah.
I need to write it
I was like,
down.
oh, that could be a good comp.
It really actually was a kind of, ahead of his time in terms of just the topic, the way they dealt with the topic. And because it wasn't like Imitation of Life, like tragedy, like, that. It was the whole family passing, and he was a doctor. I forgot what the wife was, if she was a professional or a stay-at-home mom. But it was interesting. The other thing is, I don't know if you all heard recently, and it's been in the last year or so, there was a news story about a Black couple that was selling their home. And they put, I think the real estate agent encouraged them to do this, but they put white photos in the house to make people who came to look at the house think the house was owned by a white couple. And there was a dramatic difference in the offer price.
Yeah, I did see that story, and they've done so when folks are getting their house appraised and seeing
Yes,
the difference.
that,
Yeah,
that
I
was
think it
what it
was
was,
an
the
appraisal.
appraisal.
Yeah, an
That's what it was.
appraisal. Yeah, and a lot of my work, I've written stuff that's about present time, but I always talk about the past is very much present. And for this story, I really wanted to touch upon the community access piece of it because real estate is really, it's been the American way of how people build generational wealth, because
Yes.
you're able to own your home. You can use it against so much. You can help pay for college and school and other kinds of things. You can pass it down. And the lack of access to generational wealth, equity, the ability for equity, which would have impacted the family that you're talking about, is such a huge piece of so many different ways that the Black community has been affected in practices that have been either illegal practices or practices that the law has sort of deemed okay to be done.
Right, because with that appraisal, it's not illegal technically, but if it's done in practice, it may as well be, if that's the way everybody does it, you almost need to create a law. But then it's almost like whenever there's a law, people figure out how to get around it. And it's not just with this, it's just, I mean, if you take, I'll give an example of Congress. Whenever they do a new bill to supposedly limit the amount of money in politics, like campaign finance reform, whenever they do it, they always leave some loopholes so they can still get money. So it's like chasing, going down a rabbit hole, So, but there's still racism that exists, but it's not the aggressive kind where, people aren't, for the most part, physically threatened, although that still happens. But it's more these kinds of things.
Yeah,
It's more
coded.
unspoken,
Yeah, it's coded. I think we see it a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, the election, I'm sorry, it's just so heavy on my mind, but even saying Kamala Harris is a DEI hire, right? It's a coded. That's specifically coded language. And we see some. I mean, we just see it in so many different ways. It's sort of it is the unspoken piece of things.
Mhm. So The Color of the Lie, I saw a girl, I thought I saw a girl's face. It's a girl, boy and a girl.
Yeah.
How do teens respond to your books? Are all your books targeting young adults, young
They
adult
are.
fiction? And how do they respond?
You know, I have been really pleasantly surprised at how my work has been received. And you know, I always felt my work would be received by Black kids because that's really like my primary audience. I want to write the books that I really didn't get to see when I was growing up. And so much of the reasons why I just love writing young adult is because it's almost like healing my own inner child of all the things that I didn't get to see and experience. Um, and I've just been so surprised broadly how well received my work has been. And you know, The Color of the Light, it's still fairly new. It just came out, but my first two works, it's being taught in curriculum around the country. It's been picked as a school state read. It's my second novel is Oregon book selection. So all the high school kids who want to compete for the book reading for the summer and the school year competition, they'll have to read my book. And you know, I think the thing that they resonate with is because I make my stories really fast paced and thrillers, that even if it's not coming from their background, it draws them into the story. And then what books do is they help you empathize and help you understand. And I think that's also actually one of the reasons why I love writing thrillers and mysteries, is because when I was growing up, I couldn't see myself in a lot of work, but I could see myself as the person solving the case in the story. And that's how I entered a lot of the things that I read growing up. So yeah, you know, it's been really well received. And I do things like, even though my stories deal with really heavy issues, I don't want you know, Black stories to be just about the impact of things happening to them. So all my
Right.
characters have a lot of agency. They have very strong families, even if maybe they don't support them. You can tell that there's a very solid community that circles around them. And all my stories have a love interest element of it, because I just think that we just need more love, even in the
Yeah.
hard pieces. And
We're not
I think that
always
combination helps.
angry and walking around trying to give a racial lesson, and
Yeah.
things aren't always happening to us. Sometimes we're just living and we're existing and we're
Hmm.
loving.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
So
just
what's
like
next for you?
You know, I'm in the because my book just released, I'm in the proposal stages. So I've got a couple different projects that I'm working on, but don't have an official thing I can say yet. But more young adult. I do want to try, you know, I've written three similarly sort of themed, even though they're different time periods, kinds of stories. I actually want to take a little bit of a break and kind of focus a little bit more on maybe a more commercial thriller, with still dealing with like systemic and institution types of things, but having that maybe be more of the foundation. So
Nice.
well, I think the fact that you're targeting your work to a young adult audience is really admirable, and
I think it's
it
smart, really. I
yeah,
mean,
it
if you
gives them a chance to look at things with more depth, not just on the
right.
surface.
Right. And it gives you a chance to talk to your core audience. You've defined your audience, and so you can gear your work toward that audience. I mean, often a mistake that many authors make is trying to appeal to the masses. And
yeah.
you don't have to appeal to the masses. When you try to appeal to everyone, you're not appealing to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
know
exactly.
your audience. That's the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have two books geared toward teens, but they're not fiction. So um, I'm always interested in hearing how teens respond to fiction. Because one of them is going to college debt free, which is more for the parents because the
Yeah.
teens really don't get it yet, but they will. But the parents get it. So, and the other was like a guide for teen girls, like principles to live by to be successful.
Right.
So, I don't know if I could write a fiction book for teens. I don't know if I could do that. I have
You
fiction.
surprised you could surprise yourself. I
I
didn't think I would ever be a
could. I don't
writer at
spend
all.
I don't spend a lot of time with teens, especially
Yeah,
since my daughter's
yeah. You
28
got to be
now.
around them
Yeah.
or into their stuff or
Yeah, she's
a
28
good
now, so
listener.
that's it. So I don't really have the point of view. I don't, you need that. You need,
Yeah. I've spent 20 years working in higher ed around college students. So
okay.
that
Okay.
was my other career. So I'm always around young people all the time.
Well,
Okay.
see, so you have that instant inner research going on.
Yeah.
Right. Hearing what they're talking about and what interests them and what motivates them, and social media is a big part of it, but they do social media different than we do. You know, theirs is different. So some of it can be toxic, and so um, I'm hoping that more young people get a sense of self and aren't looking for themselves through however many likes or shares or whatever on social media.
Yeah.
That's not, I told my daughter when she was first getting on there when she was 13, I let her have a Facebook. That was when Facebook was really the only one, other than Snapchat, which I heard about, on the back end. But I told her, just remember, those people don't know you.
Yeah.
They are not your friends. And so don't let that, whatever they say, define you or whatever. Those are strangers, and you need to, that people are in your actual world love you. And that's what you need to focus on, because those
Yeah.
people don't know you from Adam.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you so much for being a guest on the show, and show us your book, the cover of your book one more time.
Yeah. And I'll show my others.
Like,
I don't have my
sure,
other one
yes,
here.
please do.
Yeah.
Oh, Invisible Sun. I like that
Yeah.
one. I like
Yeah.
the cover. Wow.
Thank you.
Nice. Very nicely illustrated. So thanks so much again, and
Thank you
continued
so much.
success in the niche that you're writing in.
All right. Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you. Have a great night.